Welcome to the Women's March Canada podcast, making the equality of women in Canada the new norm. This is episode 18, and it's titled Representation, because this is all about representation today. I'm your host, Melissa Durrell, and we are talking to the Honourable Maryam Monsef. Thank you for joining us, the Minister of Status of Women in Canada. And prior to becoming a minister, I'll just give a little bit of a bio on you. You ran for mayor in Peterborough, Kawartha. And you were later elected into the Liberal Party, and then risen through the ranks. You were Minister of Democratic Institutions. You were part of that group where I think for many women in Canada, when the Prime Minister was asked why it was 50% women, 50% men, and he said, because it's 2016, you were one of those women that were standing there. So welcome.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about that day and that call, and I'd love to hear your whole story, but that was a pretty historical moment, I think, for women in Canada. What was it like being one of those women?
Firstly, thank you for hosting. And I think throughout this conversation, we're going to experience some technical difficulties. It says my internet connection is unstable, but I'm I'm at my office, so there you go. I want to take this opportunity to thank the movement that is women's marches here in Canada. I know that you women, mostly women, and those who help organize these do this on your own time, that you do it on top of several other priorities and obligations you've taken on. And I also know that it's been incredibly effective. I was in Toronto for the Women's March this year, and kudos also to organizers. You know, every single woman who took the mic that day was a person of color with different intersecting identities that don't always get the spotlight, don't always have an opportunity to share their stories. So before I get into my story, I just want to say thank you. You are a reminder of just how vibrant the women's movement in Canada is and how precious it is, but also how powerful it is, because I was at CBC that day, and you had taken over the coverage. Women were the breaking news that whole day, and that's powerful stuff. And I'm a daughter of the movement, so thank you. Mm-hmm. On November 4th, 2015, I was walking along with 31 other ministers, including the Prime Minister. That walk that you're referring to the Governor General's home so that we could all be sworn in. We had taken little buses from our hotels, which is where we were staying at that time, to Rideau Hall. We didn't really know who all was going to be selected and sworn in with us, because part of the agreement, one of the first requests is to keep it to yourself. Mm-hmm. You can tell one person if it's your spouse, or in my case, my mom, but you can't tell other people. And so I got on the bus, and I see Catherine McKenna and Dan and Jody Wilson-Raybould and Carolyn Bennett, who I'd known, and Mark Garneau, who I'd known. And that walk, it was a sunny day. It was a beautiful day in the fall, and so many people had come out to watch us. Mm-hmm. That was the most touching part of the day for me. I was just seeing how many people had been waiting for 10 years for a change, how many people had worked hard for that change, and how many people were invested in the change that they got. Up until that day, there had never been a Muslim in the federal cabinet, and that was me. Yeah. Up until that day, there'd never been an Afghan Canadian in Parliament, let alone cabinet, and that was me. Wow. Just before I got up to be sworn in, sitting next to Jim Carr, who's now my seatmate in the House of Commons, I realized how nervous I was. And from that moment on, Jim started playing that role of reassuring, has been there, a seasoned politician, and my whole life changed that day. And as did my family's, and here we are.
There you are. It's really interesting to me because I think, for so long, the people who represented us in the House of Commons weren't a reflection of who we actually were as a country, and that really changed. I guess 2015, and now, the Prime Minister has continued to do that with his, the leadership, and as he's moved people around. Do you hear from other Afghan young women, and do they need that? Is that something that they appreciate?
Well, I know the Prime Minister's work around, appointing a gender balanced cabinet, recruiting more diverse candidates for the previous election and the next one is important. He's changed the appointment process for the 4,000 other positions that the government of Canada appoints, so that diversity and merit are both considered. But we still have a long way to go. I'm still the only Afghan. There's less than a dozen Indigenous representatives, and the place doesn't yet look like Canada. And certainly we can do better around the representation of Black people and other racialized minorities. Certainly we can do better with gender diverse peoples. There's no one in the House of Commons that we know of who self-identifies as gender non-binary. We don't have anyone from the Filipino community represented. We have a long way to go. But yeah, I hear it from the Afghan women. There's about 8 of us now working on the Hill. There's a few who work as staff on our various teams, and we're finding each other. But I hear this from girls and young women across the country. I hear it from Indigenous girls and young women, for example. It is so important to honor the memory of our stolen sisters. Yes. It is important to talk about them. It's important to find the proper place in our history books for that national tragedy, and to learn from it, and to make sure that it doesn't happen anymore. And that work is important, they tell me. But they also tell me that it is so important to tell the stories of women who are rocking it, the stories of courage, the stories of resilience, those role models that they can see themselves in and think, hey, if she can do it, I can do it too. And I hear that not just from Afghan Canadians, not from Indigenous Canadians, but a variety of persons who haven't always seen themselves represented in positions of power and authority. It's the younger generations saying, I need to see my role models, because we know that unless she can see her, she cannot be her. And that's one of the reasons why I think what you're doing is so important.
Well, back at you, hon. So one thing I do want to talk about is that budget, because this was your budget. But before we go there, I think it's really important to tell your story, and I'd love to hear it. I mean, you immigrated here, and you sound like a person who just don't give up, right? But so where did you get that, and how did you get to where you are today? Because it's amazing.
I never thought I'd grow up and be a politician.
Really?
No. There were moments where the thought came to mind, but no. I always wanted to be a teacher. For a while, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. But I was raised by a pretty courageous and stubborn woman. She brought us halfway around the world to Canada so that her daughters could get an education. We weren't getting opportunities as refugees in Iran, and we certainly couldn't go back to our ancestral land in Afghanistan because of the war. And so despite the fact that I never really dreamed about being a politician, my life's been affected by politics literally since I was born. My birth has even been politicized, and had it not been for the politics of the day, my people wouldn't be scattered all over the world today. And I was also raised by a grandfather who told my sisters and me that we were going to grow up to do great things. And in our culture, many cultures, elders are revered and looked up to. And when somebody like that believes in you, you start to believe in yourself. So I ended up moving with my mom and my sisters to a really special place in Ontario called Peterborough.
Yes.
the place I call home. It's the place I belong. It's the reason I'm serving as a member of Parliament in Canada. And that community gave me a lot. They wrapped around my family with a lot of support, with a lot of encouragement. And, 22 years later, they continue to represent the best of Canada for me. And I decided to run as a mayoral candidate.
Yeah, I want to hear about that.
In the 2014 election, I didn't actually think I could win. I ran as a nuisance candidate originally.
Yeah.
And then one of my mentors, he looked at me. And when I told him that, he's like, if you're going to do this, you're going to do this properly. Yeah. I don't ever want to hear the words nuisance candidate come out of your mouth ever again. You're going to do this with credibility and with integrity. And I came within 1% of winning after an 8-week long campaign. Yeah. And then the opportunity to join Justin Trudeau as a member of the Liberal team came up, and it took a long time for me to say yes. A lot of people kept asking, and I kept saying, who would vote for me? Like, no, it's not quite time for me. I didn't take political studies in school. I'm a hippie activist in my community. I've volunteered for a lot of organizations. I've had really interesting jobs, and yes, I'm privileged. And I know I have the capacity to speak up and speak for people who expect me to, but I just didn't think I could do it. But, I think 14 people asked me if I would run when I finally said yes. And even on election night, the results had come in, everybody was celebrating. We'd won, and we'd won a majority, and I'd won in the riding, and I still couldn't believe it. It still hadn't hit me. But I think that's one of the reasons why so many women don't run. Not enough people ask them. Yeah. Not enough people connect their really valuable experiences to the reality of the job. And instead, what we hear more of is all the ways that politics can be hard and not the right place for us. And that's something that we can and we are changing slowly as a country. And we have to, because when we include more women in leadership positions, when we include women more in our economy, it benefits everybody.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree. But I would like to talk to you a little bit about it being hard, because I think, the stuff that really scares me, and I know I have a lot of friends that say that this too, is the combativeness against either the opposition parties and sometimes the media, and it doesn't seem like a really great workplace. and then we look at our Maclean's magazine, and all of you are up there, and strong, fierce women. But you're saying like we got to change it because it sucks right now. So I mean, it's not a great sales pitch for getting into politics.
No, what you did was pretty terrible just now, actually.
Yeah, sorry about that. But I do think so I think are we trying to be really honest about it so that we can move it forward? Is that sort of where we're at right now in the world?
The Prime Minister says this, hard things are hard.
Yeah.
And of course that's going to be hard. These institutions weren't designed for us.
Right.
And so of course it's going to be hard. And there's a baseball movie, there's a line in it, the first one through the wall always gets bloodied.
Yeah.
Whoever breaks those glass ceilings, there's a lot to admire and there's a lot to be hopeful about, but that process of breaking a glass ceiling hurts.
Yeah.
But does the culture in this place need to change? Absolutely. And the only way it will change is if we come from the sidelines into the space where change can be made. And if Canadians continue to demand for that change to happen, which they are. We've seen that with the Me Too movement. We've seen that with Time's Up. We've seen that with the global women's marches, is that demand for change is happening. Can this be a less than pleasant work environment? Yes. Let me refer you to the 21 consecutive hours of voting that happened just a few days ago. But and I say this at the end of a couple of really intense weeks for us, and March is, as you can imagine, with the budget having been dropped, with all the celebrations and the United Nations appearance that happens, a busy month for my team and me. So I say this at the end of like, a pretty intense period of time when I'm ready for a break with my family to just have some quiet time. It's hard, but then you sit around that table and you have a really important conversation, and it could be about righting the wrongs of the past. It could be about planting seeds that, my 8-year-old niece is going to see into fruition. We make decisions that, we began the conversation thinking we were going to go this way. And then somebody says something and it's profound and it's evidence-based and it's thoughtful and they've listened to people. And then we go this way. I sit around that table, and those special moments, those accomplishments make all the hardships worth it. But also, you're not here alone. Like in this room with me are 2 women who are part of my team. Regardless of what order of government you end up working at, where you end up making a difference, your team will make or break you. And being able to rely on people who have the same values, who have the same vision and believe in this unique opportunity we have to advance so much, that'll make all the difference. So it's hard, yes, but you're not alone. And, the alternative is to sit back and to let someone else advocate for you and do things the way that you would, which, as the strong women in my life have taught me, like, that's not realistic. But one of those moments was the budget.
I was just going to say, like,
151 years in the history of this country, the first budget to have an intersectional gendered lens applied to all new spendings.
So how did you do that? That's what I want to know. How did you do this? Because as you said, this has been in the making. No one else has been able to deliver something like this. What did you do? How did you make, because it does make all the other crap worthwhile, right? You can stand behind this budget. So what did you do? How did you make it happen?
So firstly, the Prime Minister, when we formed government, said every item that comes before Cabinet for discussion or deliberation has to have an intersectional gendered lens applied to it. Mm-hmm. We call it GBA+, Gender-Based Analysis Plus, and the plus is intersectionality. The public service needs to be credited with this because they kept GBA+ alive for over 2 decades.
Wow.
So that was the foundation that this was built upon. And then the finance minister, Bill Morneau, said to all cabinet ministers who were writing him with requests for money for the new budget, and said, you better make sure that that intersectional gendered lens is applied to your requests, because otherwise you're probably not going to get what you asked for, or it won't be taken as seriously. So those 2 things, the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister making that request, have been huge in terms of culture. And then, pardon me?
How did your ministry intersect with that, right? Like, were people calling you? Yeah.
And then something happened. They let us in, they opened the door into the budget making process. Yeah. And process hasn't been open to other ministries, rarely even open to the central capacity of government. It's usually been something that finance has kept in its own bubble, and they pulled us in. And they heard from our stakeholders. So women's groups and advocacy organizations were pulled in. We learned from other countries who had done it. We learned from the OECD, who's come in and is helping us further refine our process. The Prime Minister has asked that, we were in our first meeting about this, and I was like, okay, well, what do you want me to do? No one like me has ever been part of a process like this.
Yeah.
He said, you're my gendered lens. And so we made our requests, and again, every single item on my mandate letter, the reason that, funding for women's organizations has doubled with this budget.
Yeah.
The reason why we have a $1.65 billion women entrepreneurship strategy. The reason that we're investing money in a strategy to engage men and boys to be a stronger part of the conversation around gender equality. all of these things, including the growth and expansion of Status of Women Canada, we're becoming a full department.
Yeah, very cool.
We're legislating this process so that all future budgets go through this process. It's because the women's movement tirelessly for decades upon decades asked for this. And they asked for this whether the governments of the day saw it fit or not. They asked for this whether they had the funding or not. This is based on thousands upon thousands of hours of unpaid volunteer work and tenacity and a sisterhood, frankly, that hasn't taken no for an answer. And so how did I end up in this process with this incredible budget as part of this government? It's only because women keep rising and they keep demanding that change be made, because we know that when we make things better for women and girls, we improve the economy and society for everyone. And so it's ultimately back to the grassroots.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, thank you, and thank you for making sure that every time someone brought in something from a different ministry, that it had that lens on it. Because I think, to me, that was the most important thing, and historical. So what's next for you? I know I've had you way over time, so I want to respect that, and thank you. You've been so engaged.
Oh, my pleasure.
So what's next? I mean, like, really,
in the immediate next, I have one more meeting after this, and in that meeting I take off my minister hat and I put on my member of parliament hat. And I go through some decision items and updates with one of my team members. And then I've been invited to a wedding on April 1st. So since I'm with women, I have to go find a dress. And I have an hour in my schedule to go find a dress for a wedding. I'm going to take a couple of days to do some reading, some administrative work. And what's next for us? We're growing the department responsible for the status of women in Canada.
Yeah. Oh, I just lost you.
We need to legislate intersectional gendered lens as part of the budget. I'm involved in the G7 process. As you know, the Prime Minister has asked that all ministerials, so 7 wealthiest countries in the world coming together, the umbrella, the overarching theme for all the conversations is how do we advance gender equality together? This is Canada's signature, and my team and I are a part of that. And then, of course, supporting the women's movement. That's my number one priority, because the sustainability of all of our efforts as part of this feminist government relies on the strength of the women's movement to continue and to inspire the next generation, and hopefully many more conversations with women and leaders who will inspire me on those days when it's particularly hard. It's those conversations that rekindle the fire in the belly.
Well, we should shout out your Twitter and your LinkedIn so that people will, I guess Twitter and Instagram, I'm not sure what you're doing, but let's give us those so that we know that we can, when we can send you those messages.
Yes, come to Facebook or Instagram or Twitter at Maryam Monsef, or you can just reach out to us with the good old fashioned way through snail mail or even through email.
Thank you so much, Minister. This has been delightful, and I'm so glad that we've got you at the House of Commons repping us. So, and I'd love to do this again. So I will be in touch. We should do this either once a year at least.
I would love to, and many thanks to everyone who's been watching. I hope you have a good long weekend.
Thank you. So thanks to our guest, Minister Monsef. Thanks to everyone that's tuned in to listen. Your comments are welcome and encouraged. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then you'll get notified every single time we upload a new podcast. Our mission across Canada is to stand together in solidarity with our partners and children for the protection of our rights, our safety, our health, and our families, recognizing that our vibrant and diverse communities are the strength of our country. This is a Women's March Canada podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Women's March CDA and our website, womensmarchcanada.com. I'm Melissa Durrell. Have a great day.